He is affiliated to Jaslok Hospital. He has presented many papers in various conferences and won many awards.
Today, as Dr. Dholakia sir said, very interesting talk that we are going to be talking on, very practical and very different from the routine talks that we are listening to daily. Today's talk, first of all, I would like to thank Jaslok for giving me this platform and giving such a wonderful topic to talk on. So today's topic is how to start safe practice in the COVID era, consultant practice stroke GP practice. So I would like to divide my talk into three parts. The first would be a brief introduction about COVID. Now, as we all know, we've heard again and again, unprecedented coronavirus disease, COVID-19 pandemic has taken the world by a storm. Unfortunately, till now we have around 18.5 lakhs, around 18 and a half lakh cases in India. This, as we all know, coronavirus is a viral infection which is caused by the SARS-CoV-2 virus. It is an airborne virus which spreads through respiratory droplets plus contaminated surfaces. It is basically an enveloped RNA virus, and there are 7 types of this coronavirus, of which the 3 dangerous types are the SARS, which was discovered in 2002 2003, where there was an outbreak in China. Then came the MERS, MERS, which is the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome found in the Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia. And in 2019, and the SARS-CoV-2, which was the first case originated from the Wuhan city of China, and the first case reported in India basically on 30th Jan 2020. As we all know, it's been 134 days since the country has gone into a lockdown, but now the complete lockdown is not there. Depending on the states, there is somewhere a partial lockdown, somewhere there is a complete lockdown, somewhere the phases, phase 1, phase 2, where the lockdown has been now opened up. The resumption of normal services, including healthcare, is now on the anvil. As we all know, this COVID-19 basically has an incubation period of 2 to 4 days, with the median being of 5 days. So, as an endocrinologist, I will be talking about diabetes facilities, as well as we are going to be throwing some light on general practitioners. What are the RSSDI guidelines for healthcare professional post lockdown? Because as we all know, with due respect, with I would say a big hands salute to all the medics, the doctors, the nurses, the ward boys, and the paramedics, the pharmacists. Everyone has the sisters, the nurses, the lab technicians, the police, everyone has really, really worked hard. But as we all know, coronavirus is going to stay for some time. Now, we don't know exactly how much time, say 3 months, 6 months, a year. So now we have to strategize, and we have to make certain guidelines as to how do we deal with it, or how do we live with it for at least some time. Hence, these guidelines are very important as medical doctors, what we should follow for corona. Now, as we all know, healthcare professional, we are at the front line. That is why we are called the warriors. We have the highest risk of exposure to the contagion. In fact, preventive measures will differ depending on the level and type of care. And unfortunately, Italy reported 20% of healthcare physicians developing this infection, because we are very close proximity with the patients of corona. That's why the chances of the doctors getting this infection is very high. Every healthcare physician must have a detailed knowledge of the procedures and protocols to reduce the risk of infection. And unfortunately, in India, we have lost 115 doctors, brave, I would say, soldiers who have lost their life giving the service to humanity because of COVID. This study was up till July 28th. Of this study, 55% of the doctors were below 60 years of age, 29% of the doctors were below 50 years, and 16% were below 40 years of age. Unfortunately, the general practitioners, more than 50% of these doctors who have lost their life, frontline workers, have been general practitioners. That is because the clinics are unfortunately small. Social distancing sometimes becomes very challenging in them, and the clinics are in crowded places with no safety measures. So with this today's talk, I think we will try to cover the parts and aspects on how we can try to keep ourselves as secure as possible. Now, teleconsultation basics. So with the advent of social media coming in, the teleconsultation has also come in. Now, we should not encourage patients to come for routine follow-ups. What I mean is routine general follow-ups we should not encourage, especially patients who are at increased risk for coming to the doctor are patients with age more than 60 years. Secondly, patients with uncontrolled diabetes. Thirdly, chronic lung disease like asthma and COPD, chronic kidney disease. In short, patients who are immunocompromised, patients who are on chemotherapy and immunosuppressive drugs like azathioprine, methotrexate. Now, when we talk of diabetics, which patients do I call for my consultation? Is number one, most of the patients we try to see them on teleconsultation, telemedicine, because that has really come to our rescue. But patients, number one, who have repeated low sugar, hypoglycemia, such that they go into giddiness or sometimes syncope, loss of consciousness, those patients should either come and visit the clinic or in severe cases directly go and get admitted to the hospital. Secondly, patients with repeated hyperglycemia with sugar more than 400, and if there is a scare of them going into diabetic ketoacidosis, then these patients should also either go to a doctor's clinic, or if you're suspecting DK, then rush them directly to the hospital. If patients complain of blurred vision and you're suspecting diabetic retinopathy, then they should be brought to the clinic. If there is a sudden loss of vision, directly admit them to the hospital. Fourth, non-healing diabetic foot ulcers, very important. These patients should be brought into the clinic. Number five, patients where you're suspecting sepsis, especially fever, cough, cold, breathlessness, diabetics where we are suspecting pneumonia. These patients should also be shifted directly to the hospital. Number six is patients with peripheral vascular disease. So patients complaining of pain and cramps in the legs and calf, which increases on physical activity. And if we suspect peripheral vascular disease, of course, with the help of Doppler and the ABI ankle brachial index, we can diagnose it. Or patients, number seven, with retrosternal pain in the chest or burning sensation in the chest, or weakness of any of the limb, either the upper limb, lower limb, or complete one-sided limb. So in short, if we are suspecting myocardial infarction or stroke, these patients also should not be consulted on the phone and they should be rushed to the hospital. So that is basically the carry home message, that not to call patients for routine follow-ups. Only the patients which I said whom we are suspecting, they should be brought to the clinic or directly should be shifted to the hospital. Approach the first consult. So as we all know, the teleconsultation can be done by three methods. Number one is the video consultation. Number two is the audio consultation, that is the voice call, or number three is the text messaging. Of course, the patient is identified, the consent is implied, and quickly assess if the emergency care is needed or no. Now, how do you know whether this patient needs emergency care? Number one, if the patient is presenting with hypoxia, saturation is going below 90 to 90%, that means he needs to be rushed and it is an emergency care. Number two, if there is tachypnea, increased respiratory rate more than 32 per minute, or tachycardia, heart rate going more than 100 per minute, or if you see patients is using his accessory muscles for respiration. So this is the time you need to understand that this patient is an emergency care, is not a mild case or moderate case, and this patient needs to be shifted. Now, of course, when you take the detailed patient evaluation, maximum or complete information should be taken. Very important is this history of either a contact with a suspect patient or a confirmed patient, or a history of travel is very, very important. Because now with the lockdown, the traveling has been subdued, but initially in the early days, used to ask a lot about history of travel. 14-day travel history was very important. Now, with monsoons coming in, there is always a confusion whether the patient, is he having a flu or are we suspecting COVID? So how do we differentiate between a common flu and COVID? Of course, both are caused by viral infections. COVID is caused by, as we have discussed, SARS-CoV-2, while your flu is caused by influenza. But the only difference between the two will be that with COVID, the incubation period, that means from the time the virus sets in the body till the time onset of signs and symptoms appear, that will be longer. While for flu, it will be only a history of around 2 to 4 days. Secondly, the recovery period, because COVID is a more serious infection, the patients will take longer time to recover from COVID as compared to flu. In fact, in acute cases, 1 to 2 weeks for COVID, and in chronic cases, patients may recover even up to 4 weeks to 6 weeks in longest, which for flu is shorter, maximum up to 2 weeks. Number three, breathlessness may be associated occasionally, not occasionally, sorry, breathlessness may be associated more with COVID, not with flu. And fourth, most important, loss of taste and loss of smell is also associated with COVID. So, in short, if a patient complains of fever, cough, stroke, cold, breathlessness, and the history is more than 5 to 6 days, then your direction of suspicion should go towards COVID, not towards flu. Now, approach for a follow-up consultation. Similarly, again, with the video consultation, audio or text, the RMPs should be reasonably convinced that he is, of course, if you're doing a video consultation, you can recognize the patient. On the voice consultation also, with the voice, you would know. But if you're on the text, then confirm the patient identity by his name, age, or you would have the patient's concerned phone number, and quickly assess again if emergency care is needed. At any time, if you feel that the patient is needed to come and visit you in person, at any time you feel teleconsultation will not work, then please ask him to follow up in person. Do not waste time, because time is very crucial for such patients. If you feel that, as I told you, hypoxia is there, breathlessness that is causing the hypoxia, tachypnea is there, tachycardia is there, patients are not maintaining the saturation, then rather than consulting on the phone or at home, directly shift the patient to the hospital. Or if you can see X-ray, if you have done an X-ray, it is showing the changes on X-ray, or HRCT is showing signs of pneumonia, ground glass opacity is seen, signs of pneumonia. And now on the HRCT, they even have the grading of CORADs, grade 2, 3, 4, 5. So depending on the severity, then these patients should be rushed to the hospital. In fact, 70% of RT-PCR is positive. That means it is positive, but 30% of the times RT-PCR can be false negative. So it means that even if the test comes negative, that is your RT-PCR, still there is 30% chance of the patient having COVID. So most importantly, we have to even judge clinically, not go by the report all the time. And the indirect tests also are there too, which can give us that whether we are going in the direction of COVID. So number one, in CBC, we see the neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio, which should be more than 2:1. Secondly, ferritin can be increased. Number three, D-dimer would be increased. Number four, LDH would be increased. And number five, of course, that this PCT, procalcitonin, C-reactive protein, these are the indirect markers for COVID. So this also should be done. And of course, if you are suspecting a cytokine storm, then the test to do is interleukin 6, IL-6. So these are the ways, not only going by RT-PCR, of course, RT-PCR is the most reliable, but many of the times we have started the treatment for COVID, even if RT-PCR is negative, but if X-ray or HRCT is showing signs of COVID, along with raised indirect markers. So the carry-home message is, any patient with fever, until or unless proven COVID negative, should be treated as COVID. So if all the other tests are negative, that is your malaria, dengue, typhoid, urine infection, respiratory infection, not going in favor of any other cause, and if the fever is not, you are not able to diagnose, then treat it as COVID, especially in this pandemic, rather than not to treat. Now, guidance for outpatient diabetes care facilities. Again, here it is written about diabetes, but I would mention in general. So number one, what I'm going to be mentioning is about a consultant's clinic, as well as you can correlate it with a general practitioner's clinic. So my clinic is located in a building on the 5th floor, opposite Jaslok, Dr. House. So what we do, I am mentioning how we do it in our clinic, and I can give you we can discuss how we can do it in our general practitioner's clinic, because I do understand that space is a constraint, especially in the GP clinic. So usually when the patients come in our the building, at the society entrance only, the security checks for the temperature with the help of infrared thermometer and the saturation. Now, if yours is a fever clinic, then also if this temperature is above 100, or saturation below 94, then a patient should be politely asked to go to a fever clinic or a hospital. However, for us, because we are not seeing fever patients, we refer them to the fever clinic or we refer them to the hospital, because I'm seeing endocrinology patients. So if the concerned doctor is informed and the patient is politely asked to go to a fever clinic. Now, secondly, patients should not be allowed to come without a mask. They should wear a mask. Now, thirdly, when they are standing for the lift, they are made to stand with social distancing with blocks, designated blocks in between, at least with the distance of 2 meters apart. Fourth, as soon as they enter the lift, not more than two people. Now, that also depends on the size of your lift. The lift, once they enter, they are made to stand with their backs facing each other and faces in opposite direction. And of course, they should not touch the keys with their hands. As far as possible, the lifts are disinfected with sodium hypochlorite 2 to 3 times in a day. Now, as the patient enters the clinic, again at individual clinic, now this can be done with for you all as well. The temperature and saturation is checked. Secondly, what we do, we give them a new mask, because we do not know the patient, the mask that he's wearing, is it contaminated? Is it a fresh mask, or has he been using it for a long time? So we give them a fresh new mask. Along with that, we give them a shoe cover so that this infection is not carried away from through the shoes. Most importantly, what we do and what we all should follow is no walk-in patients should be encouraged. Patients should be called only by appointment basis. And as soon as the patient enters, the form is given, which can be filled with the help of the receptionist, where the signs and symptoms of COVID are asked. And basically, it is just a self-declaration form. So that is done. If there is a patient waiting already in the doctor's room, then that patient is made to wait in a separate room, because we want to maintain that social distancing. The other thing what we do and what we all can do is that we do not encourage the patients to get the files. As far as possible, the prescription and the reports are WhatsApp and emailed to the doctor. So that is very important, no touch. And most importantly, the tabletops, the doorknobs, the locks, the washrooms, all are regularly disinfected with sodium hypochlorite solution. As far as possible, relatives should not be encouraged to come with the patient unless the patient is dependent, like a geriatric patient, elderly patient, or a child, or if patient is a little toxic and he cannot come on his own. Relatives, if also want to come, not more than one, should be encouraged. So this is how we do what we do in the clinics. And of course, very important, even if we are seeing a fever clinic, then definitely all the staff should be in level 3 PPE. That is, the full gown should be worn with the goggles, the face shield, the N95 mask, the gloves, everything should be worn, the shoe cover. But if we are not doing a fever clinic, because see, nowadays there are a lot of asymptomatic patients also. So as far as possible, at least I feel the doctor should be in the complete gown, and he should also wear a face shield. Everyone should wear a face shield and an N95 mask, and the doctor should wear complete gown, because he is in close proximity with the patient. If there is a pharmacy in your clinic, or there is a pharmacist, of course, with a glass chamber in between, then the pharmacist need not wear the gown. He can just wear the mask. That is more than a good amount, good for him, because he is maintaining that social distancing. So that is very important. And as I told you, very important is, if we are having a general practitioner clinic, in between our consultation table and the bed where the patient is made to examine, if a plastic curtain can be put in between, and we can maintain that social distance, so that would be very good. As far as possible, auscultation should be avoided unless or until if it is very, very necessary. So this is what I've told you. At the entry, already we have told temperature check, staff PPE level has been told, mask should be mandatory. Every individual, as I told you, we give them a new mask as soon as they enter. And physical barriers, that is what I told you, glass or plastic should be installed at the station to limit close contact. And staff must use the standard screening questionnaire, that is what I told you, to identify the suspect of COVID-19. Now, for what are the protocols for the clinic? As far as possible, windows should be kept open to allow cross ventilation. And as I already told you and repeating again, every nook, corner, knob, door, washroom, tabletops should be cleaned regularly by sodium hypochlorite solution. The doormat, which is at the entrance, also should be disinfected with sodium hypochlorite solution. And already regarding the protocols that we need to maintain at lift, I have already been told. Very important is to reinforce the importance of hand hygiene. This is very important. Respiratory hygiene, especially while coughing, sneezing, we have to cough at the elbow, sneeze at the elbow level. And cough etiquette is very important. Follow no touch technique. Now, when either a person can wash with the 70% alcohol based sterilizer or with soap and water for more than 20 seconds. Very important. When should one wash his hand, especially while sneezing, coughing, or before and after eating, or before and after going to the toilet. This is very, very important. Social distancing should be maintained at all times. This is also equally important. Now, with regard to patient entry norms, face mask, we've already said. Disinfection, how it should be done has been told, and hand hygiene has already been discussed with you. And what are the doctor consultation protocols? Distance, of course, we need to maintain between the patient and doctor, with the patient facing away from the doctor, and at most of the time should be maintained. History taking, this is very important, should be very specific. Questions asked to the point, and examination should be also done a quick way, not to waste time and have excess exposure to the patient, because anyone could be asymptomatic. So as far as possible, we consult in less than 15 minutes. But if our consultations can be specific to the point, that would be very beneficial for us. Examination, as I've told you, should be brief, and auscultation should be done only if essential. Stethoscope, diaphragm should be cleaned after every patient examination. Now, this is the most important part around about PPE. So this is what we call the doffing and donning. Now, the most important aspect is that most of the patients usually get disinfected when they are donning, when they are removing their gowns. So that is the most important part that we have to take care of. So first, most important is to wear the gown, full covered torso from neck to knees and arms to the end of the wrist. This should be completely wrapped around the back and fastened in back of neck and waist. So mask should be such that it should have an elastic band at the middle of the head and neck, fit flexible band to nose bridge, fit snug to the face. So the mask should be up till here. Sometimes we see that patients are wearing masks from here. So this is not the correct thing. From here to here, the entire mask should cover the respiratory air droplets. Now, number 3, as I told you, most important, either wear a goggle or a face shield that should be placed over the face and the eyes and adjusted. So first, wear the gown. Second, as I said, wear the mask. Third comes the face shield and or the goggles. And fourth is the gloves. Of course, very important to keep hands away from face, because as I told you, if we touch a contaminated surface and touch it over the face, this can spread. Limit the surfaces touched and change gloves if it is torn or heavily contaminated. And at each step, very important to perform hand hygiene. Now, how to remove it? This is the most important. So first, there are a variety of ways of removing the PP. To remove the PP in following sequence. Number 1, of course, first now we start with the gloves. So for the thing that we had put at the last, the gloves, we first remove the gloves. So if we have worn the gloves in left and right, with the help of the right, we will touch the palm of the left and remove this glove and bring it on the left, on the right side. And with the help of the left, now that the left as is clean, we can insert a finger and onto the palm area, as you can see, and remove it. Slide the finger of the ungloved hand under the remaining glove at the wrist and peel it off and discard it. As far as possible, we should keep washing our hands with soap and water or alcohol-based swab at each and every step, because you never know when your fingers or when at any point the hands can get disinfected or contaminated. So now once the gloves are out, then we remove the mask and or the face shield from the back. We should not touch it from here. We have to touch it, remove it from the back of the ears and discard it. Now we also remember, while removing the glass or goggles or the face shield from the back, as I told you, by lifting the hand or the earpiece. Here you can see you should not touch the front part, because these all part are the contaminated part. So while removing it from behind, we remove it. And if the item is reusable, you place it in a designated receptacle for processing. Otherwise, discard it in a waste container. Now, thirdly, then you remove your gown. The gown front and sleeves, as we all know, the front part would be contaminated. The sleeves will be contaminated. So as far as possible, we need to immediately wash the hands with the alcohol-based swab. And again, once you unfasten the tie, that is either at the neck or the back, you remove it. Then you remove it in the opposite direction, ulta. You will not touch the outer part. You will touch the inner part, because the inner part is the one which is not infected. So pull the gown away from neck and shoulder, and as you can see, touch inside of the gown only. Turn the gown inside out. So in the opposite direction, we will remove it completely and fold it and discard it. Again, at this step, again perform hand hygiene if your hand becomes contaminated. So you do not want the virus to infect you. So at every stage, you keep performing hand hygiene. And at the end, they remove the mask or the respirator. Front mask, again, as I told you, do not touch the front part. Remove it from the back of the ears. And if your hand gets contaminated, again, immediately wash it with the alcohol-based sanitizer. Wash, and at the end, again, discard it in a waste container. Wash hands or use an alcohol-based swab after removing all the PPE. So this is the most important, because most of the doctors would get infected, especially while removing, because when we are wearing it, we are not going into a contaminated surface. Now, who should use PPE? As I told you, the help desk, everyone in short should use. Although here it is written that the doctors should only use the mask and gloves, I do not agree. It's better that we use the complete gown as far as possible. The complete N9, the level 3 would be much better. If you are seeing no patients of fever, at least wear the complete disposable gown with the mask, with the head cap, with the face shield. That is very important, or the goggles. Now, if the person is a dentist or an ENT and is going with very close proximity opthal to the patient, then definitely the level 3 PP definitely comes into the picture. And they do wear, in fact, 2 gloves. And it's better to wear the mask, the N95 mask. Again, for the pharmacy, as I told you, they are not at much of a risk, because there is a glass slide in between them and the patient. So if they just wear the medical mask as well as the gloves, if you do not wear the gloves also, it's okay, because many times it was seen that if persons would wear gloves, these contaminated hands, then they would touch on their face. So if you're not wearing the gloves, at least you keep on doing your hand hygiene. Of course, the sanitary staff, they are not much at a risk, so they should just wear the mask and the gloves. For them, it is important. Now, with regard to the prescription and investigation, as far as possible, as I told you, not to bring files or documents. Ask the patient to share the soft copies on email or WhatsApp. Prescriptions generate either handwritten or computerized would be much better. The consultation fees, if possible, should be done by digital way, or many times we've heard that if digital is not possible, then the cash, many people keep it in a sealed envelope and do not touch it for around 2 to 3 days, 48 to 72 hours. Or if you want to count the money that the patient has given you, you definitely need to sterilize your hand after counting that money. So that is very important. Consultation fees, as I told you, by transfer. Staff should clean their hand with sanitizer after collection of money. Patient file, as far as possible, if it is not brought, it would be very beneficial. Patient should clean his hand if he has bought his file with the sanitizer after putting the file along with the prescription into the plastic bag. Now, regarding the pharmacy, as I told you, the pharmacist should wear a triple layer mask, no touch technique with the patient. While dispensing the medicines, it should be placed in paper bags with clear instruction to the patient while maintaining social distancing. E-payments again are preferred over here, and if cash payment is done, to be collected in a plastic bag and not to be touched for 3 to 4 days. Now, most important is even for lab staff, because this virus can be got to the doctors even in the lab if the reagent use is not correct, or if we do not properly use or keep the specimen that we have got. If it is not done in a proper way, then also this infection can be got to the laboratory staff. So very important to allow only one patient with a mask or face cover at a time in the lab. The staff definitely needs to wear an N95 mask, or I would prefer a 3-layer mask with face shield, gloves, and apron. This is very important. And reports, again, not to call the patients back to the clinic, should either be again done by digital way, either email or on WhatsApp. E-payments are preferred. Cash payments to be collected again in a plastic bag and not to be touched for 3 to 4 days. So as far as possible, we need to, we need to take the necessary precautions, especially in the lab. It is very important, especially at the screening, very important, and at the doctor consultation. These three are the times where the infection can be brought or got to the doctor, where it can spread easily. Now, disinfection and biomedical waste management, as we all know, high touch surfaces, as we've already discussed, like wall tiles, reception seating areas, stools, tables, doorknobs, door handles, stair rails, door frames, bed frames should be cleaned daily with sodium hypochlorite for at least 30 minutes, at least 3 times in a day. So this is very, very important. This is how you disinfect it, segregate it, the plastic items, the glass items, tie them tightly, infected waste, and sprinkle hypochlorite 1% on them and cover them with a second cover. This is very, very important for them to, and then put them in the cardboard box and seal it and label as a suspect COVID, so that the infection does not even spread to the people who are coming to collect this waste. This is very important. The cleaning protocol also, we've said, very important. Stethoscopes should be cleaned, rubbed with the alcohol-based sterilium, and very important to dry it properly and replace. In fact, here it is written weekly, but I would recommend daily cleaning rather than weekly. PP cuffs and covers should be again cleaned, and cuffs should be wiped with again alcohol-based swab, and thermometers also should be stored dry in individual holder. Clean it with a detergent and tepid water and wipe it with alcohol-based rub swab in between patient use. Store it in an individual holder inverted, preferably 1 thermometer for 1 patient, although I know it is not possible to keep 1 thermometer for 1 patient, but even if we maintain these protocols, it would be very important. Injection and dressing trolley also should be regularly disinfected with detergent and 70% alcohol based disinfectant, and this is very important as well. So what are the carry home key messages to start before reaching home? Because we know that when we reach home, we also have elderly patients, because in India we have a joint culture. So we would have parents, grandparents, children staying at home. What we need to do now, the government has given us the protocol, but now it depends on each and every individual that he or she should take it as his or her responsibility. So definitely, while coming home from work, every family member should empty their pockets, remove wristwatches, mobile phones, and keep it in a tray and spray it with a disinfectant. Secondly, to use disposable pens and water bottles. Mobile phones also, to decontaminate the phone before leaving the clinic. Clothing, as far as possible, to shift to scrubs, full sleeves if available. Work desk, to clean your desk, doorknob, computer, workstation at least once before starting and after finishing. And equipment, to leave the stethoscope in the hospital and decontaminated the car handles frequently. In fact, what we do in our clinic is we have bought the fogger machine, which is not very expensive, and usually 2 to 3 times in a day with the sodium hypochlorite, the complete clinic is fogged with the defogger with the help of sodium hypochlorite solution. Now, also most important to remember, keep car keys, pens, sanitizer bottle, phone in a box outside the door. Do not keep these sanitizer bottles in the cars, because we are already worried. The alcohol is there, the petrol tank is there. Of course, now it is not sunny, but as far as possible, not to keep sanitizers in the cars, because it can be sometimes risky. Clean hand with the sanitizer, then use the tissue and sanitize and wipe the items placed in the box. Take a head bath with shampoo and full body bath with soap, and wash the clinic clothes or put in the washing machine with high temperature settings. In fact, in our hospitals, just look, when I had a discussion with the surgeons, and if they would operate even a suspected case for of COVID, or definitely a COVID case, they would first be asked to take a shower and change and then go home. So I think that was a very good protocol, that don't go home and then take a shower. Take a shower, change into your clothes, and then go home. So that is very important, because we do not want to carry this infection back home. Now, with due respect, and there was a request from Dr. Dholakia sir that with regard to the mild cases, how do we treat these cases? So, number one, of course, if we are for prophylaxis for COVID, prophylaxis means if we are doctors or medics, paramedics, or we have come in close contact with the or we are coming daily in close contact with COVID patients, then for prophylaxis, vitamin C needs to be taken 500 milligram twice a day. Zinc needs to be taken 75 to 100 milligram per day. And after a month, that can be reduced zinc dose to 30 to 50 milligram per day. Vitamin D needs to be taken on a daily basis for 1000 to 4000 units per day. Very important to eat well and maintain a good mental hygiene. What I mean by mental hygiene is very important is sleep, 7 to 8 hours of sleep, and try to remain positive and de-stress yourself by whichever way you like, either by chanting, listening to soft music, or reading stories, whatever you like. And most importantly, once a week, hydroxychloroquine 400 milligram per day for 6 to 7 weeks. Now, of course, we know that patients who are above 60 years of age or who have arrhythmias or ECG is not normal, QT prolongation is there, then those patients should not take HCQ. Secondly, coming on to the mild cases, vitamin C again 500 milligram BD, zinc 75 to 100 milligram per day, vitamin D3 2000 to 4000 units. If a patient is a known case or at risk for heart disease, diabetes, then aspirin can be started. In mild cases, HCQ 400 milligram BID for 1 day, followed by 200 milligram BID for 4 days. If HCQ is contraindicated, then you can use ivermectin or for 3 days, once a day, 12 milligram once a day for 2 to 3 days. If, of course, along with this, azithromycin needs to be given, but HCQ and azithromycin can sometimes be risky because they can prolong the QTC. So instead of azithromycin, one can even use doxycycline as an antibiotic. There was also a lot of talk about favipiravir. Although it can be used for mild to moderate cases, the results are it has not shown any external benefit, neither it has shown any harm. So as an antiviral, favipiravir, I have not used a lot, but there are a lot of other colleagues of mine who have been using it, and the dose for that is 1800 milligram BID for 1 day, and that is 200 milligram. The tablet comes in 200 milligram, 9 tablets in the morning, 9 tablets in the evening. So it becomes really big, lot of medicines, and followed by 800 BID for 14 days. Of course, contraindicated in pregnancy, hepatic impairment, renal impairment. So that is where it should be contraindicated. Remdesivir has been tried in the early phases of COVID, but that is an IV injection, so that you have to give it or refer the patient to the hospital where the dose would be 200 milligram IV OD followed by 100 milligram IV for 9 days. Remdesivir also, people have had mixed opinions. Some of them have found encouraging signs. Some of them have not found very encouraging signs. So this also, if should be given at an early stage, not at a late stage. If, God forbid, there is a worsening of the X-ray, the ground glass opacity is increased, saturation is reducing, dyspnea is increasing, CRP is increasing, then it is always better to start steroids, especially methylprednisolone, 40 milligram BID, and that 5 to 7 days. If the symptoms worsen, then it can be increased to 80 milligram BID. But I would feel if the symptoms worsen, the hypoxia worsens, respiratory rate increases, then it is best to shift the patient to a hospital rather than treating at home. Of course, when you're giving steroids, so that the infection does not flare up, we need to give it under good cover of antibiotics. Anticoagulants are also very important because most of the cases the patients died due to disseminated intravascular coagulopathies. So either LMWH, low molecular weight heparin, Clexane, that is your 0.4 milligram subcute OD, or enoxaparin 40 milligram can be given. Many cases I have seen patients being discharged for at least around say 3 to 4 weeks, and they've been put on NOACs, that is your newer oral anticoagulant of rivaroxaban 15 milligram per day. So this is the dose that we give. Of course, the most important is your oxygen. That is very important. Your steroids are very important. And always remember, these patients have happy hypoxia. So even at 90 to 90, they wouldn't look like in that much of respiratory distress. But there was a study done that if patients are not treated aggressively, and if the breathlessness is not treated, and if the patient saturation did not increase, and we have not started the steroids with good cover of antibiotics, with good oxygen therapy, a lot of patients landed up with pulmonary fibrosis. So that is very important. Of course, if the IL-6, this is just for your knowledge, I'm telling you, we will not start this in a clinic. If the IL-6 is high, the cytokine storm, we are suspecting the cytokine storm, then the drug we give is tocilizumab. That is to prevent the IL-6 inhibitor basically. That dose is 4 to 8 milligram per kg. That dose, of course, it is contraindicated in sepsis. So if the PCT is high, the CRP is high, and if you're suspecting sepsis, then tocilizumab is not given. That dose is 400 milligram IV to be given over 2 hours, and that can be repeated after 24 hours as well. So maximum of not more than 800 milligrams should be given, but that, as I again telling you, should be given in the hospital setting. And for those patients, it's better to shift the patient, not to keep them in the clinic. So the carry home key messages are: the healthcare service will undergo a huge transition from the pre-COVID era. Non-emergency and routine OPD consultations should be considered for teleconsultation. Proper use of PPEs, hand hygiene, respiratory etiquette, and operational measure is a must. Prevention is better than cure, holds particularly true in the current situation. So with that, I end my talk. Thank you for a patient hearing. Thank you once again to Jaslok, to Ashutosh, to Vartika, to the entire team, Mr. George, Mr. Aryan sir, and to Dr. Dholaki and Preetisha for this opportunity. So the first question has been asked: what about the CT value? So I think that is what Dr. Vibhakar has asked. I think very good question. Definitely CT does play an important role, because I told you 70% of the time RT-PCR can come is positive, but 30% of the time it is false negative. So definitely if the RT-PCR comes negative, and if you're suspecting COVID, it is definitely very important to do a CT, because CT and RT-PCR, 95% of your doubts will get cleared. So CT plays a very important value with RT-PCR for COVID. Now CT, of course, we will do in those patients where the breathlessness is there, the hypoxia is there, the tachypnea, tachycardia is there. So that we will definitely do. Secondly, clarity about N95 mask with or without respirators. So I think this is also one thing that has come into the market. Lot of doubt about the N95 mask with or without respirators and the authenticity. As far as possible, it has proven that it is the most safest, more safer than even the 3-layer mask. So I think N95 mask, I would not like to use it with the respirator. The normal N95 mask, I think, is most safest as far as possible, because it filters up to 95% of provides safety up to 95%, and it has proven in the studies that it is definitely more safer as compared to the 3-layered mask or the cotton mask. But again, the N95 mask is mainly for the medical workers. I would like to tell you, the medics, the paramedics, or who are coming in direct contact with the patients. If we are talking of the general public, if they are not coming in contact, then they can wear either 3-layer mask, or if a person, now that the 3-layer mask, even it has become quite cheap, still if that they are finding that an issue, then even a cloth mask is good enough. That can be washed regularly over 2 to 3 days, the cloth mask, with warm water. Otherwise, the N95 mask, I would not like to, the N95 mask, of course, if you're working in a COVID setup, then definitely it should be thrown after use. Otherwise, the N95 or the the 3-layer mask can be used for 2 to 3 days, but better to dispose it off if you don't want to take the stress. Now Aditya Shah has asked, what about newspapers? Can it be used in clinic or home? I think that is also a good question. As far as possible, in our society, 50% of the people are using the newspapers, and 50% are now reading the news, because I think with social media coming in to the picture, so there have been no report that with the newspaper this infection has come into the house. Even with vegetables, at one point I forgot to ask, and fruits, basically if you get it out from a grocery store, also it is said that once we remove the vegetable or the fruits, it is better to keep them in a tray and then vegetables, especially keep them in lukewarm water for some time. So with regarding to newspapers, my personal thinking is that if the same news can be bought on with the on the PDF now, especially all the newspapers are available in PDF format on the mobile. So why to take the risk? Better to read it on the mobile. And with the mobile apps, you can read various different types of newspapers available. So as far as possible, avoid newspapers for some time, and to read it on the mobile would be much safer. The next question is, can the currency notes be ironed to sterilize them? I think as far as possible, these are some things. I think India is great. People do a lot of alternate things, and there have been a lot of videos, but I have not ironed them. It is better to keep them in a separate, as I told you, plastic envelope, or if you, as far as possible, digital, that is your transfer or paying through the card will be much better. Or if still the patients do not have that facility and if they are giving you cash, better to keep it in a safe envelope. Nowadays we have a lot of what do you call these machines which have come as disinfectant machines, but I don't know how far they are good enough to keep the money. Best thing is to keep them in an envelope or a plastic envelope and not touch it for 2 to 3 days. And of course, once after counting the money, it is better to wash the hands again with soap water or with the sterilium. Mr. Ashok Shah has asked, sanitization will damage the furniture. No, so that is what I said. If you use the hover and that sanitization, if you are, I'm not talking of the drops. If the hover, if you use it, it gets condensed in the vapor form, and you do not have to put it on the furniture itself. You can just spray it all over the clinic, because these are respiratory air droplets and the contaminated surfaces. If you can just use the hoover with the sodium hypochlorite, and if this vapor will definitely not damage the furniture, because we are using them regularly in our clinic. Now, Dr. Vibhakar has asked, use of HCQ, ivermectin, doxycycline, azithromycin, all have been debated. I think very good question. Definitely, ivermectin has definitely reduced the viral load by a good extent, and HCQ use for prophylaxis and mild cases has also proven beneficial. And I think because we have now nothing in our arm, so it is better to give than not to give. So I definitely use this in mild cases and in prophylaxis, because we have no other options left with us. So better to give than not to give. And secondly, as I told you, if you are worried, then don't use HCQ with azithromycin. You can use it with doxycycline. Now, the next question is, does UV rays disinfect COVID? So Dr. Purvisha has asked. I think this is also a very good question. I do not think that UV rays would disinfect COVID, because logically speaking, even with such high temperature of summer which we had with 40-42 degrees, when this virus did not die. Now that is a debate, political debate, whether is this a natural virus or is this a synthetic virus. But at least I can say, with such high temperatures, if this virus has not been killed, I do not feel with the ultraviolet rays this virus would get killed. Of course, the only important things that we need to do is maintain social distancing as far as possible, hand hygiene, very important. And now let's hope and pray for the vaccine. Let's hope and pray for the vaccine. So, anonymous attendee, in COVID infection, fever definitely comes, or only weakness and body ache is there in the patient? I think this is also a very good question. Number one, fever is the most commonest presentation in COVID. Of course, weakness, myalgia, body ache will remain for a longer time. But as I told you, sometimes it is not necessarily that all patients would have fever, because so many of the patients are asymptomatic. They do not have any symptoms. But the most commonest symptom is fever, followed by cough, cold, breathlessness. Very important. Even patients are presented with diarrhea, loss of smell, and loss of taste. So bottom line, fever, cough, cold lasting for more than 4 to 5 days. Do not think of flu. Then go, and your thought should go in the direction of COVID. Especially with the contact history, if it is there, then definitely COVID. Because we have seen in a lot of cases, one family member gets infected, then the second is infected, then the third is infected. Now, Dr. Nalini has asked, CT values in COVID positive patient, does it make a difference in the isolation protocol during home quarantine? So I think Dr. Nalini has asked very good thought-provoking question. Of course, with the CT values, our treatments change, because with the CT, we know what staging of COVID are we looking at, the correct staging, and we also know at what level of lungs are involved. Is it 30% involvement of lung? Is it 50% involvement of lung? Is it 70%? So we can definitely differentiate whether it's a mild case, moderate case, severe case, and whether this patient needs to be treated at home. As I told you, if the saturation goes below 90, respiratory rate goes above 32, patient is using accessory muscles of respiration, fever is not coming down for 48 to 72 hours despite starting the treatment, then do not follow your home quarantine. It's better to admit, because we have seen that many of the patients, unfortunately, they neglect this cough, cold, fever for 3 to 4 days. Then 5th day, they come to the practitioner. By the time the patients come to the hospital, we have already lost 7 to 8 days. So as I told you, time is money, not to waste time in such patients. So this has already been told. If currency note, already I told you, if it carries virus, what we can do: sterilize the hand, keep it in a plastic envelope, do not touch it for 40 to 72 hours, because after that the virus definitely gets killed. And as far as possible, the best option is to tell them to pay by digital modes, by card or by transfer, or in short, as far as possible, to avoid cash. How to face shield when we are wearing numbered reading glasses? I think Dr. Preeti, very good question, because this is the problem even I face. So because with the face shield, when we are wearing the glasses, the fogging is quite evident. So as far as possible, we need to wear the mask. Even you need to wear the face shield also. And because of course there is no method of defogging, the only way is you can keep some wet wipe or a wet tissue to clean your glasses if it gets fogged regularly, because precaution is better than prophylaxis is very important. So one has to maintain the safety. So for such things, one needs to wear the face shield even with the reading glasses, and this difficulties of fogging even I face very regularly. So another question asked is how to sanitize the mobile and laptops. Is it safe to use the sanitizer or spirit? So as far as possible, in fact, even with the wet wipes, we can sanitize it with the mobile, especially because I know the front part of the mobile, or you can keep a plastic cover for the mobile. That would be the best part, or the bag for the laptop, because there is always a scare that if the wet wipes used, or if we directly put on the screen the sterilium, then that could be harmful. So at least the back part of the mobile, or the best part is to carry it in a plastic cover. That would be the best, so that we are not worried of water seeking into a mobile. So that would be the best part. So Dr. Rahul has asked, after COVID infection, patients come with weakness for a long period. What should we give? I think, as I told you, this myalgia, arthralgia, body ache remains for 4 to 6 weeks. And as I already told you, vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, multivitamins, this is very important, because this myalgia weakness will remain for a long time. So I think these are very important, that we need to give all of these vitamins. Along with that, they need to sleep well, maintain some amount of course, this I'm not talking once a patient is discharged, that time he cannot do the physical activity, but slowly some amount of physical activity should also be encouraged. That is, if a patient is not infected with COVID. Of course, once he's infected, he is so tired and lethargic that they cannot do the physical activity. But as far as possible, encourage them to do some amount, to follow good diet. Carbs should be restricted, especially for our diabetic patients. We tell them spot jogging, spot walking, exercise, aerobic exercise, floor exercises. Dr. Suyog has asked the vaccine latest update. So I think this is one thing which we all are waiting for. Definitely the Serum Institute along with AstraZeneca has said around 6 months to 1 year. Bharat Biotech had said 15th August, but it's really something, I think, according to me, at least 6 months minimum will take, because these vaccines take phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, post-marketing studies. So you cannot just expect the vaccine so fast, because the trials need to be done. The good effect needs to be seen. Then only can we get the vaccine. So I think minimum 6 months. loss of smell and taste alone can be COVID. I think these are, yes, the asymptomatic, the variable presentations of COVID, in which loss of smell and taste is one of the feature, along with fever, cough, cold, breathlessness, diarrhea, which is the first of COVID patient. Asymptomatic patients, can they spread infections? So logically speaking, although they are asymptomatic, it could be that because their immunity is better, like a young patient is there, his immunity is well, his hygiene is good enough, and he is he could not be suffering because of his good immunity. But it is quite possible that a person, the other patient who is immunocompromised, he sure can get infected. So it's very quite possible that an asymptomatic also can spread infection. Could be that because of his good infection, a good immunity, sorry, he is not infected. So after 10 days of COVID symptoms, should I go for the COVID test? I think this is also one very good question asked, because this was a debate that usually the virus shedding remains for 15 to 20 days, and it was stated that even the protocols for for discharge have been changed. Initially, we would repeat the COVID test for prior to discharging, but now after 3 days, and if a patient is afebrile, then we would discharge the patient. So not necessary for repeating the 10 days. Clinically, if you feel better, as far as possible, for 15 to 20 days from the first day of starting treatment, patient should be in what do you call, patients should remain in home isolation, should not go out. And also there was a study done which stated that patients who were immunocompromised, this the RT-PCR would come positive even for up to 2 months. So no need to unnecessarily again repeat the test. 15 to 20 days, if patient is afebrile, having no symptoms, then patient can go out of home isolation. That is 15 to 20 days, very important. So I think this is also very good question asked. What is the debate about immunity duration? In fact, this was just one study that I read today in China, that again they have got patients with reinfection, although the chances of reinfection of COVID are not very common. But today, the article that I was reading stated that again patients were got with IgM positive, so they did not still, and the IgG disappeared. So as far as possible, this is a tricky question to answer. Till now, the immunity has been stated that this is a false statement, that once patient with COVID remains lifelong immunity. Till now, the studies have shown that up to 3 to 4 months, because this infection, viral infection, has just been of 6 months. It's not a long period of disease that we can answer this question at this moment. But the article which I read about the Chinese patients stated that the immunity in patients who had COVID, the antibodies disappeared. So they again got the IgM antibody positive. So as far as possible, till now, we can say around 3 to 4 weeks, 3 to 4 months, or even say about 6 months. We can only answer this question about the immunity duration as we know the virus more, and as the duration or the time for which the virus remains, if it's longer, then it is much easier to answer this question. Dr. Dhanaji has asked how to tackle the suspected COVID patients. Definitely a very good question. If you are suspecting a COVID patient, as far as possible, if I told you saturation is falling below 92 or respiratory rate is high, tachypneic, using accessory muscles, then definitely shift the patient to the hospital. Or if you're suspecting COVID and patient is stable, mild cases, then whatever we have discussed, HCQ, vitamin C, D, zinc, that all needs to be started. If patient cannot take vitamins HCQ, then please give ivermectin. So do you need to take HCQ after COVID infection has occurred to prevent from any cross infection of other strains? So I think, and someone has asked, even after taking HCQ therapeutic dose, should we continue? No. So see, both are different. Prophylaxis, of course, if God forbid you have suffered, you or he or she has suffered from COVID, then as I told you, 400 milligram BID followed by 200 milligram BID for 4 days, 400 BID for 1 day. Or if you are in a prophylaxis, then definitely you need to take it once a week. But if you have already suffered, you've taken the course, and if you are still attending the patients regularly, then I think it's better to take it even as a continuation as prophylaxis, because it would do no harm. So it's better to take than I would say not to take. And can we give steroid to mild to moderate cases? So I think this is also has already been answered. In which cases would you give steroids, and what would be the dose? As I've already told you, 40 milligram BID for 5 to 7 days, methylprednisolone, which can be increased to 80 milligram BID, and this is for patients where there is increased CRP, there is breathlessness, saturation is going down, oxygen requirement is going up, patients are tachypneic, tachycardic. Then, of course, with the steroid, high under cover of antibiotics should be given, and if possible, as far as possible, to shift the patient to the hospital. So, someone has asked a very good question, which I hope I could answer, is how many days will this pandemic continue? So, I think this answer no one has till now. And yeah, I think that is the last question. Yes, role of chloroquine who cannot be given HCQ. So I think this is also a good question. I think chloroquine also, as far as possible, because it has been seen reverse, that HCQ has been given nowadays, even if a patient is coming up with fever, and if they are diagnosed with malaria, as far as possible, people have started giving HCQ. If they have continued, they have not switched over to chloroquine. But till now, there has been no data or any, what do you call, any role where, or any prophylactic thing where chloroquine has been given instead of HCQ. So till now, no data is available for that. But I think this is one thing which can be considered, because both are more or less the same. That is hydroxychloroquine, and this is chloroquine. So I think if rather than not giving the patients HCQ, the option would be to give ivermectin, as I told you. If patients cannot be given HCQ, it's better to give something which has been tried and tested, ivermectin for 3 days OD once a day, rather than giving chloroquine. So with that, I thank, and it was I really like that so many questions were asked, because usually if no questions are asked, either it is understood that people have understood everything, or I have not been able to do my duty and people have not been able to understand. But I think I'm so happy, such an interactive audience, and really hats off